of those things, but deeply appreciate this space to be here. I am a proud board member of the Contigo Fund. My co-moderator, Charlotte Cha-Cha Davis, one of my closest friends as well. She is having some technical difficulties. She may be joining us later, but we do want to dive in because we know this topic is very critical to folks, and we've gotten audience questions building up to today. We're also working to monitor the audience questions as well. And again, we have 1 hour with 3 of our local law enforcement leaders. And so with that, I think if I just start introducing them, they will appear. So we have with us today Orange County Sheriff John Mina. We also have with us Police Chief Orlando Rolone. And we're also joined with Volusia County Sheriff, Mr. Michael Chitwood. I think he should be hopping on as well. Yes. Welcome, everybody.
Good afternoon. I didn't get the time memo, so sorry.
That's okay, sir. Can y'all hear me okay?
We can hear you. We hear you well.
Okay, wonderful. Well, welcome, everyone, to this conversation. Again, my co-moderator, she goes by Cha-Cha, and she's an incredible leader. She's having some technical difficulties, but we're going to dive in. We appreciate you all joining us. And so we'll just dive in if that's okay. And we'll try to make sure that everyone has a chance to answer every question. And on my side too, brevity is appreciated because of course we have 3 very influential people in the sense of our public safety and this current moment in history that we are in. And so we want to make sure that we get as many questions in as we can. So we appreciate that. And so to just start us off, we're in this moment of a global pandemic as well as a global uprising happening now. It's centered in the murder of George Floyd at the hands of law enforcement. But of course, we know that police brutality is not a new fight in this work. And in this moment, we're in this movement led by Black folks for Black folks to dismantle the white supremacy that exists within our institutions, including in policing. And of course, the Contigo Fund is an organization founded after the Pulse tragedy that centers LGBTQ people, particularly LGBTQ Black and Brown people. And that liberation began as a riot against police brutality. So for the LGBTQ community, this is an issue very important and very much in the center of so much of this community. And so in this moment, law enforcement, of course, are a big part of this conversation and what public safety looks like, how we can end state violence, what can we do to keep all of our communities safe. And so that's the frame of this conversation, and we appreciate you all joining us. And so my first question for each of you, and maybe we'll just start with Sheriff Mina and then Chief Rolone and then Sheriff Chitwood. Our first question is, in your view, what is the role of law enforcement in our communities?
So the role of law enforcement in any community is first and foremost to be guardians or protectors of our community. All of our agencies deal with the reduction of and prevention of crime, and what's most important, I think, to all of us is the reduction and prevention of violent crime. But over these past 3 decades, I have learned that we have a bigger responsibility to our community, and we all are a part of the community. So to continue to engage with our community, and it's important for our residents and especially our youth to see us in non-enforcement type situations. So you'll see it. I'll speak for all these agencies. I think that you'll see us in a number of different roles, whether it's supporting charities or supporting youth groups, police athletic leagues. We try to engage with our community. I think unlike law enforcement ever has in the past, I think it's something that's important to all of us. I think it's something that the community expects, and I think it's a service that we have been delivering. And that's the only way we're going to continue to build trust in our communities.
Thank you, Sheriff. Chief Rolone.
So Anna, just like the Sheriff said, we serve all people. Ida, I'm sorry. We serve all people. And an example of that is the Pulse tragedy. when those officers from all over Central Florida responded to that scene, they didn't know who was inside. They didn't know what they looked like. They didn't know who they represented. What they knew was that they were willing to risk their lives to go into that setting and try to save as many people as possible and stop the individual who was obviously harming those inside. So we are dedicated to this community. Just like Sheriff Mina said, we live here. This is our home. And we are part of the fiber that makes this community a great place to live. So I know I want to dedicate a lot more time to answering questions versus giving statements. So I'll cede the rest of the comments to Sheriff Shipwood.
Well, thank you, Chief. But Ida, I can't sum it up any better than Chief Mina said it. You know, what kind of police department do you want? Do you want a police department of warriors, or do you want a police department of guardians that is there to guard the civil rights of everybody, regardless of your color or your creed or your sexual orientation? So, and I think we all want the same thing. The problem is, how do we get there? So having said that, I'll follow with Chief Orlando and say, bring on the questions.
All right, we appreciate that, and we've got plenty. So our first question is regarding the criminalization of our communities. So the Contigo Fund, as you all know, we serve LGBTQ people, particularly the most marginalized within these communities. That includes, but certainly not limited to, of course, the transgender community, our houseless youth, sex workers are also part of our community, undocumented immigrants. Of course, in this moment with the COVID pandemic, unemployment is skyrocketing, particularly among LGBTQ people who work in a lot of the industries that are disproportionately impacted. So many of these things, as we know, when it comes to criminalization around houselessness, around petty theft, around the color of your skin, because we know that racism is systemic in our criminal justice system. There's a lot of racial disparities and general criminalization of survival and of just being Black, right? Or being undocumented, for example. And so our first question, and maybe we'll start with Chief Verlone and then Sheriff Chitwood and then Sheriff Mina, and we'll kind of do a cycle there like that. Our first question is, what are you doing within your jurisdiction to address racial disparities and decriminalize our communities?
So I think history will show, if you look back maybe even 6-8 years, the number of arrests that were being made in, say, Orange County compared to the number of arrests that are being made now. It's in the thousands, the number of the reduction of arrests that are being made on the average year here in Orange County. Issuing notices to appear, issuing juvenile civil citations, it is something that has been pushed for a very long time, and I think we're doing a good job of trying to bring those numbers up. It can get better, and it should get better, but we're trying to do that. But I think in part, a lot of our resources are being driven to areas where the resources are being asked for, where maybe crime patterns are dictating where those resources are having to be deployed to handle the crime activity that obviously is involved in that. So as part of this discussion, I think moving forward, we need to figure out also, or we need to talk about also how to reduce the amount of crime that's occurring in certain parts of our community to minimize the contact between law enforcement and the citizens that we serve. Every law enforcement officer wishes one thing, that they never had to write a report, that they never have to take someone to jail. Obviously, they wish they could just come to work and say, hey, how you doing? I'm here to serve you, and that be it. But unfortunately, our society doesn't dictate that right now.
Thank you, Chief. Sheriff Chitwood.
I'll piggyback on a lot of what the Chief said about civil citations. I can tell you statistically, when I first got elected in 2017, we had a use of force overview done by the Police Executive Research Forum out of Washington, D.C. They issued a 90-page report to us that we reconfigured the way we do use of force, including trying to move the organization's culture away from being a warrior into a guardian. Some simple things: when you walked in the training academy, the sign over the top of the building said confidence in the line of fire. We changed that to enter to learn, leave to serve. All of 2018, we trained. In 2019, it was the first year that we could say the entire organization was trained and ready to rock and roll. And what we discovered was use of force by my department was down 50% from the year before, from 123 incidents down to 165. We also discovered that use of force used against deputies was down 50%, from 125 cases against deputies to 64. We also discovered that crime was down 40% from 2016 to 2019, and arrests were down. So to me, just looking at the bigger picture, what we had put in place started to drive those numbers down. And one of the things I think that shocked a lot of people that have requested these reports that we put out is that in incidents where deputies in Volusia County were assaulted, 94% of the men that committed the assaults were white males. 6% were African American males, which goes to look at even our arrest numbers. Of the 9,000 people that we arrested last year, 9,300 people we arrested, 7,800 people were white. So when people sometimes look and feel that you have 3 black guys walking down the street together, they're committing a crime, the statistics belie that. The arrest statistics belie that. That's stereotype.
Right. That's a very interesting point. And so often, of course, in the criminal justice system, Black and brown folks are disproportionately impacted, even though they do commit, less of those crimes. Appreciate that, Sheriff Chitwood. Sheriff Mina.
Yeah, I'll add on and just say that I think, especially for those low-level offenses that have been significantly deprioritized, our priority continues to be violent crime, those crimes against people who committing breaking into our houses and our cars, and less on transient related crimes or people involved homeless. And I'll say, although I don't run the jail here in Orange County, I will tell you that its capacity is near 5,000, and it's at the lowest it's been in like 20 years. So I think they're only at 2,200 right now. So that's less than half. And I think that just goes to show you. And if you look at all of Orange County, not just the sheriff's office, over the past 5 years, our arrests of juveniles have decreased by 40%. And so I think what you're seeing over the past decade or so is a deprioritization, less relying on arrest stats or quantity of arrests, and more relying on the quality, and really focusing on how we can fix the issues in any particular community, especially some of our more underserved and challenged communities. And and the numbers would show that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you all for your answers and that question. I heard a theme also around reducing crime and how do we reduce crime. I know that a lot of folks like myself would argue that we need to balance our budgets and invest more in community programs that will reduce crime, in the sense of what's the root of crime. It's often poverty, it's systemic ills in our society that are systems designed to work exactly how they're working, and we have to untangle those, right? But we'll get to that kind of topic shortly. And I may have my co-host joining at some point, or another mystery guest, we'll see. But appreciate y'all bearing with us with some of these technical challenges. And the next question is around jail populations and COVID-19. I think Sheriff Chitwood, you may have mentioned the reduction in jail population, especially during COVID. What should be done to keep jail populations low and prevent them from returning to pre-COVID levels? And Sheriff Chitwood, I think it's your turn to go first.
Well, thank you. I share the sentiment of Sheriff Mina. I don't control the jail here in Volusia County. It's a separate, the county runs the jail. So I think to hammer home what Sheriff Mina has said and Chief Orlando is telling you, is we're trying, there's a paradigm shift in our organization to focus on the violent repeat offenders. And that's where most of our resources are going, because everybody, you're going to get into this a little bit, everybody talks about how massive our budgets are, but when you drill down, it's personnel costs that control a large amount of our budget. There's very little wiggle room for training, for technology, and for innovative, creative programs. I mean, to give you an example, I spend $2 million a year in crossing guards. I mean, I can't change that. I have to have those crossing guards out there. So I think as forward, policing smarter and going after the violent repeat offenders is where the mission of the police has gone. Back years ago, to get to Chief Mina's point, you made all these quality of life arrests, open container, urinating in public, all these things that clogged up the system and clogged up the jails. And now there's been a conscious shift to say, hey, what are we doing here? This really isn't what we should be doing. We should be attacking the folks that are really destroying the quality of life for everybody.
Right. And if I could, I appreciate the clarity that sheriffs do not run the county jails. And of course, Chief Verlone certainly does not run the county jail. But you all, of course, do enforce the laws that lead folks to go to county jail. And you have discretion in that on what you enforce. Of course, the state law prevents some of this, but we also know that law enforcement have some discretion in deprioritizing certain things, and that there are things, of course, county and city government can add on to additional fees, fines, and other crimes. But I digress, of course. And so I'll take the question again that was just asked to Chitwood to Sheriff Mina, if you have anything to add.
Yeah, so again, I think especially when COVID began, you saw definitely deprioritization. Look, the deputies got it. The last thing we want to do is start arresting people for low-level offenses, overcrowding our jails, and making it ripe for the spread of COVID. So if you, like I said, although I don't run the jail, I check the numbers every single day, the arrest numbers, and so you saw a huge decrease in the amount of arrests, during this whole COVID pandemic, during the stay-at-home order. And if you remember, after we enacted the stay-at-home order and specifically the curfew, I immediately came out and said that we would not use the curfew as a mechanism to arrest more people. And I think really in that whole, gosh, it must have been a 2-month period, there were only less than 5 arrests, at least from the Orange County Sheriff's Office, that were made for curfew violations, and those were folks who were out breaking into cars anyway, trying to take advantage of the situation. So again, I think you did see huge. The other thing that we did in this area, and not necessarily, absolutely not taking credit of it, I'll give the credit to the jail chief, the state attorney, and the chief judge all got together and basically made a conscious effort to release some of our nonviolent, low-level offenders that were in jail in order to decrease the jail population. So it significantly decreased. And like I said, it got down to, according to the jail chief, Chief Quinones, a level that he hadn't seen in 3 decades because he had been there for so long. So I think in our community, we did a good job of, like I said, deprioritizing those, especially low-level offenses, and to help stop the spread in our jails.
And I think the question from community is, post-COVID, of course, COVID is here very much still, but in the sense that if we do recover from this, will we maintain these new policies that are designed to really, lead us more towards safety, where we're not criminalizing quality of life crimes?
Yeah, so I'll just add that, again, our priority has been and continues to be on the violent repeat offenders, drug traffickers who engage in violence to enhance their organizations through shootings, home invasions, and carjackings. That's our focus. We have to maintain safety here, and ultimately, we are responsible for the crime that happens in our communities. And I will say that remains the focus. And if you look at the numbers and you look at the types of arrests, I would say that those numbers reflect that. And I pulled this up the other day. There's not a single person in the Orange County Jail for a standalone possession of cannabis charge. It just doesn't happen anymore. Many times those are as a result of multiple drug charges, or the person had a warrant and had some misdemeanor possession. And in fact, the state attorney's office is not even prosecuting those cases anymore. So it's a low, very, very low priority endeavor.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Sheriff. Chief Verlone.
Ida, one interesting observation when and of course, no one likes a curfew, right? We don't like curfews. But we saw, like the sheriff and both sheriffs mentioned, we saw a drastic reduction in the number of arrests that were being made during that time. As soon as the curfew was lifted, there was an uptick in the number of arrests. And for pretty serious offenses, not just your average or misdemeanor type offenses. So I think, again, part of the issue is that sometimes our actions are driven by the actions of individuals that force the hand on law enforcement when it comes to certain arrests. And we are also driven by the wishes of victims who demand prosecution, who demand that some action be taken. Schools is a perfect example. It used to be when I was growing up, when I was a child, that the discipline was rendered by my teacher, or my biggest fear was my parents, the discipline I was going to get at home. Now, in most cases, you have those individuals, administrators, or the parents of the children who want to prosecute and force the hand on law enforcement when it comes to certain things. So, anyways.
Thank you. Appreciate that. And I think that, fits well into, a crisis we have in our schools. We're over policing our children and really need to, in a sense, go back to when, kids could be kids. And we saw, of course, here in Orlando, a 6-year-old was arrested for being a child. And the legislature, failed to act on reforming that law as well. And so that's a crisis of how do we get, law enforcement out of our schools and really make our schools places where kids can be kids. And of course, making sure folks are safe, but how can we meet that demand, right? The next question at hand is one very important to folks I want to make sure we get to, and that's around evictions. And I know that is mainly with, of course, our sheriffs. I'm sure it's not news to you both that the statewide eviction and foreclosure moratorium is set to expire July 1st at 12:01 a.m. This would be the second extension so far to this deadline from the governor. We have no indication yet if he plans to extend it again or not. The question posed is, regardless of what the governor does, will you all continue to hold back on issuing eviction notices in your county? And Sheriff Chitwood, I'll put that to you first.
We're going to be guided by legal counsel on that. If I can actually violate the governor saying don't evict, and then obviously we have to look and see what eviction orders are coming our way to do that. So our legal team is reviewing that before I say, hey, we're absolutely not doing this. I don't want to get removed from office for violating, the law.
So, when the COVID pandemic struck and people started losing their jobs, I was contacted by Representative Eskamani, your sister, and some others, and they had asked if we could do the same thing that some other jurisdictions were doing, specifically Miami-Dade, and that was halting evictions. So I said, I'll certainly take a look. It's a court order signed by a judge. So we're very lucky to have Chief Judge Don Myers here. So I immediately reached out to him. I told him my stance on it, and there were several reasons that I was in agreement with it. Obviously, we're struck with this pandemic, and people were they had lost their jobs. Two, I didn't want to put my deputies in any more danger than I had to, having to serve these evictions and possibly unnecessarily getting infected with COVID. And then three, I didn't want our deputies to be vilified and shown as the ones who were kicking people out of their homes because they didn't have a job. So actually, I give all the credit to Chief Judge Don Myers, who also worked with Clerk of Courts Tiffany Moore Russell, because they really guide that process. I did reach out to the Apartment Association here in Orlando. I let them know what my thoughts were, and of course, because they represent the landlords. They weren't necessarily pleased, but they understood it. So moving forward, we're actually having several meetings, both with the chief judge and the clerk of courts, myself, and actually we're also going to include Heart of Florida United Way to see what can be done. But moving forward, so the problem that the sheriffs have is if a judge signs an order to eviction, we would be cast as not obeying the court order, and we don't want to be put in that position. But I will say, again, I don't want our deputies to be vilified for the ones, kicking people out of their homes, and also, we still are seeing the increase in COVID. So, we'll have to see what the governor does on that, and then see how the chief judge and the clerk of the court react to his decision, and if they start ordering those evictions again.
Thank you for that, for both those answers. I'm sure it's no surprise to either of you to hear that. We would urge you all, whatever within your unilateral authority, to protect people and keep folks in their homes. That truly is public safety and absolutely critical in this time. And appreciate your insight into how you're working to achieve that. Our next question is one that I know many folks have been discussing. Oh, and there's Daniel Downer. Hello.
Hi, good afternoon.
Folks, thank you for being patient with us with our technical difficulties. I'm happy to have a co-moderator, Daniel Downer. Daniel, do you want to briefly just introduce yourself?
I'll just keep it short and sweet. My name is Daniel Downer. Pronouns are he and his. I'm the executive director of the Roseland Convo Initiative. But first and foremost, I sit at the intersection of identifying as being a Black man, but also a Black queer man. And so I'm grateful and gracious to be having this conversation with all of you today.
Thank you, Daniel. I'll put your question, then Daniel, I'll hand it to you for because I know I've been taking up a lot of space here. Our next question is around budgets, local budgets, which we know, of course, our counties are the folks who, our counties and our cities are the folks who delegate the budgets. And we just had a conversation with Mayor Buddy Dyer as well as Commissioner Hill on this. But regarding our local budgets, and we'll start with, I think we're starting back with Sheriff Mina, I believe. With our local budgets, do you believe in reducing your budgets to invest in other public safety efforts, such as mental health, drug treatment, and housing, and deprioritizing things like criminalization, militarization, and incarceration? So that's a big question, but the big one there is, do you believe in reducing your budgets to invest in other public safety efforts? And Sheriff Mina, we'll start with you.
Yeah, so mental health, housing, drug, and alcohol treatment are severely underfunded in all of our communities. I think the stat always talks about how Florida we're dead last when it comes to mental health. So part of the issue for us in law enforcement, and Sheriff Chidwood had mentioned that most of our expense is personnel and benefits, and so to significantly contribute to any of those organizations, because you're talking about several huge social issues. You're talking hundreds of millions of dollars. That's bodies, that's deputies, not patrol. So probably not a day goes by where I don't get a phone call, an email, or a letter, or a conversation on the street about, hey, I want more deputies in my neighborhood. I have issues going on in my neighborhood as it relates to whatever, this crime or that crime. And so, and additionally, we have 1,500 people a week, some say 1,000, some say 2,000, moving into Central Florida every single day. And even though we're in the pandemic, that's not starting. So, Mayor Demings did a study, or conducted a study, had one conducted here at the sheriff's office before he left, and it said that we needed significantly more personnel in order to properly keep this community safe. So I am working towards achieving that goal and working around, losing people through attrition and other things. And like I said, we need more law enforcement, less law enforcement. I'm fully supportive of funding those other entities, but not at the expense of cutting into law enforcement. And again, as Sheriff Chidwood had mentioned, it's not the as we call the demilitarization and our equipment. It's really a personnel issue, and that affects all personnel. It affects people who answer our calls on 911, our crossing guards, people who investigate our crime scenes and our CSI. So that's all across the board. So at this point, I wouldn't support that. I would look to really our county and our other government entities to fund those sources through other means.
Thank you for that, Sheriff. Chief Rolone.
Likewise, when it comes to our budget, the bulk of it goes to pay and benefits for the officers and for the equipment that they need, like their vehicles, gas, all that stuff. But, a lot of people don't realize about $17 million of our budget is dedicated to, say, non-law enforcement functions. Our community relations division, our crossing guards, our school resource officers, our community service officers. When you look at those type of positions, their main role is community engagement, engagement with our youth. Those are positions that are not necessarily meant to be for enforcement only purposes. So I think we need to do a better job of educating our citizens on how our monies are spent and what type of equipment is purchased on occasionally, and what the purpose for that equipment is also in the process.
Sheriff Chitwood.
I agree with everything these gentlemen said. They're right on target. I have 1,000 employees. You factor in dispatch. I have 480 sworn deputies. Less than half of that are actually on patrol. When you figure courts that are mandated by the state constitution we must do, extraditions, civil service. So I have 33 openings that I can't fill. I will tell you one thing that I would like to see, and I'm trying to figure out a way to be creative in my budget now. I would like to see us have mental health experts and social workers embedded in my patrol force. So because the federal government, the state government, counties and cities have kicked everything down to us, we're handling it all. I mean, think of how stupid this is. They want us to enforce social distancing. What better way to destroy community relations, as we saw in New York City, where you get a guy to give him a ticket for social distancing. Next thing you know, 3 cops were on the guy's getting tased and locked up for not social distancing. It's another thing we shouldn't be doing. But we put in $1 million for a juvenile assessment center. We haven't had one in Volusia County in decades. And what that does is every juvenile that we come in contact with would go to this center where mental health experts were there, school was there, drug counselors are there, try to do assessment of why we came in contact with this young man or young woman, assess their family, and get them into the pocket where they can get the services that they need. When I submitted my budget, the first thing they came to me and said is, cut that out, you're not getting it. And then cut out another $3.5 million out of your budget, which were programs like that we wanted to initiate. Like we have a juvenile ankle monitoring program where when you get a juvenile, instead of the judge putting him in secure custody, they'll put an ankle monitor on that juvenile, and then automatically a bunch of services get triggered there. We look at the young person's marks. This person's bad at reading. Well, after school, they're in a reading program. Get them involved in after school activities and try to, and then do a stick and carrot. As the kid does better, maybe we take them to a magic game. Maybe they get to go out on a boat and go fishing. And then once they achieve that goal, the judge removes them from strict supervision. That program got cut, and we saw a big uptick with that. You have kids that may have been in 9th grade that were reading at a 2nd grade level. After 6 months, they're now up reading around an 8th grade level. So there are things that aren't traditional law enforcement that we provide that service, and here with the COVID-19 and a downturn in the economy, those things are getting swept away.
Thank you for that, Sheriff. It certainly sounds like we got to fix our local budgets in a lot of ways. Daniel, I'll pass it to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ida, and thank you so much to you for taking time today to have this conversation with us. I think it's no surprise that we know that there is a global uprising that's happening, grounded in the murder of George Floyd and countless other Black lives at the hands of law enforcement, police. This movement is led by Black folks for Black lives, and it calls on us to really speak out against the white supremacy that exists within our own institutions, especially police and liberation. And so one of the questions that I want to ask is, do you think investing in mental health, in housing, in substance abuse, etc., would reduce what you call or what is called or considered crime? And if we can start with Mr. John Mina, and then we'll go out with everyone else.
Yeah, so absolutely. I kind of a lot of the same things from the previous question. I totally agree that, and like Sheriff Chetwood said, we do spend a good amount of time responding to non-crime related issues, whether that's people in mental crisis, or that's homelessness issues, or that's drug and alcohol abuse, drug overdoses. We in Orange County here, unfortunately, we have well over 100 drug overdoses, mostly through heroin and fentanyl every single year. So one of the things, a lot of people say, well, that's really not a police issue. You can just have when people overdose and we're able to save them, we'll just get them drug treatment. But the problem is the drug dealers who are selling the deadly drugs, they know the drug is addictive, they know the drug is killing people, and they don't care. So what we do is when we go to those drug overdoses, we try and work backwards. Obviously, there are no charges on the user, but we try and work backwards and try and find the people who are actually dealing this deadly substance in our communities. And we have been successful, work with the U.S. Attorney's Office, actually prosecuting some people for actually killing people for the drugs they're selling. I think there have been other communities that have done, the walk-in centers, and where officers or deputies are able to, instead of, doing that whole, people complain about, people begging in the street, and the business owners are complaining about that. They're complaining about, people who are on drugs or alcohol or going through some kind of mental crisis in their downtown area. Instead of arresting those people that we have done for years and years and years, we're really treating them more like a victim, taking them to the center and getting them the resources they need, whether that's, housing, drug and alcohol treatment, or some type of mental health issue. And I know San Antonio, Texas has a great program that I wish we could replicate here. And again, I think that's something that our local governments need to deeply invest in, and let us put our resources into keeping this community safe. And like, at least for me, although crime is down here in Orange County, violent crime still continues to be an issue, and we would rather take those resources away from some of those social issues and direct them towards the violent crime that is still occurring in our communities.
Thank you for that, Mr. Ramon.
So I could not agree with you more. The core problem that everyone is raising across the nation is that we need to move towards a process that will allow for those who can't afford housing to have that opportunity, for those who have not been given an opportunity to get either to be able to go to college to get a better job, or to be able to go through a trades school to get a better job. We need to identify those paths so that we can hopefully improve the communities that are affected by poverty, the communities that are affected by lack of jobs. And I think it will, at the end, have a positive result in the reduction of interaction between law enforcement and certain communities in our areas of responsibility. So I could not agree with you more.
Thank you. Mr. Chitwood.
Yeah, I agree with everything everybody said. We do need to figure out a way to fund more mental health, and we need to figure out a way for drug abuse. We have more overdose deaths in Volusia County than we have COVID-19 deaths in Volusia County. If you were to do a work study for all three of us, the amount of time and the calls that we respond to that involve mental health issues, I think it would really shock you to see just how many calls we're on, whether they're violent, whether it's domestic violence, or just it's a Baker Act. It's family members saying we need your assistance to get this person into the proper system. Our mental health place here in Volusia County for substance abuse and mental health is Stuart Markman, and they do a great job. They just don't have enough money, enough beds, or enough people to help overcome these problems. 1,100 people last year, I think the number was, voluntarily went for opioid addiction, Stuart Markman returned away at the front door because of funding. Where did those 1,100 people go? They go back out on the streets into our neighborhoods. And some of them will tell you, I commit a crime, so I can get locked up. I could probably get a little bit of treatment if you arrest me, or they go back and overdose or something horrible happens. So I absolutely agree with everything that was said here, that there has to be a way to come up for the funding for mental health and for drug abuse. Absolutely, positively.
Oh, thank you for that. I want to just give us a time check. We do have some more questions that we're trying to squeeze in. We appreciate y'all answering them. Just encouraging all of us that brevity is our friend in this moment. But I want to toss it to Daniel. This, of course, is the Contigo Fund. We center LGBTQ, Black and Brown communities. We center this conversation around them as well. Daniel, I'll toss it to you.
Thank you so much. So I want to pose another question. We're seeing daily on our TV screens where use of excessive force and officer misconduct occurring. And I think one of the things to uplift is that this is not only happening to Black and Brown cisgender individuals, but also members of the LGBT community, in particular Black, trans, and non-binary and gender non-conforming individuals. And so the next question that I would like to bring into this space is, what do you believe law enforcement policies and procedures should include to ensure the safety and the affirmation of their interactions, in particular with transgender and gender non-conforming and non-binary individuals, with a special emphasis on Black and Brown trans individuals and gender non-conforming and non-binary individuals? And we'll start with you, Mr. John Mina.
Yeah, so, the history in this community, I've been very invested in making sure our LGBT community was protected. So I'll go back to when I was, chief in Orlando, started the first LGBTQ liaison program there, expanded it, for the first time and ever. We had participated as an organization in the Pride Parade. But we took it a step further. What we did is we created the Safe Place Initiative, which is an initiative for businesses to identify themselves as a business that would be a safe harbor for those in our LGBT community. And then we also created a transgender policy. So how we wanted our officers to interact with the transgender community based on input from them. And then, so when I got here to the sheriff's office, I expanded their LGBT liaison program. I implemented the same Safe Place initiative for all of Orange County. And then I implemented or put in place interacting with transgender persons policy here at the sheriff's office. And if you remember back when Sasha Garden was killed here in Orange County, she was misidentified and wrongly, and that was just a lack of education and understanding on the part of the agency. So we have since corrected that. And so, huge supporter. I think that also our policy also includes deputies who want to transition as well. So it's a good policy, and actually we've been asked, from different agencies all over the country for copies of that policy.
And we have another question from social media, and maybe we'll give this to Chief Rolone. Will you commit to firing officers? Well, actually, this is a yes or no question. I think we could just go around, actually. Will you commit to firing officers with an excessive amount of use of force and misconduct complaints? And maybe, Chief Rolone, we'll start with you. We'll just yes or no, ideally. But
Ida, and I know for our citizens, it's hard to hear this, but it's complicated. We have to abide by civil service rules. We have to abide by contractual agreements, the Officers' Bill of Rights. We have to deal with arbitrators who are then the final say when someone fights they're firing. You know, those are all the things that we're going to have some deep discussions about. It's not a simple yes or no answer. If it rises to the level where